Colin, when I look at St. Louis, I think of Delmar Boulevard. Why is Delmar Boulevard different than any other major street of divide in any other American city?
I think, I mean, St. Louis is a remarkable city for its history of segregation, partly because, I mean, I would characterize St. Louis as a city that's southern in its race relations, but northern in its organization of property. And so there's a stark segregation reinforced by all sorts of private and public policies, restrictive deed covenants, and real estate practices that created this sort of this iron divide between African-American North St. Louis and white South St. Louis.
There is the arch, which shows that expansion of America. Continue on that. What is the difference, for example, between St. Louis and Detroit?
One of the remarkable things about St. Louis, which is playing out in the inner suburbs like Ferguson today, is that it's a remarkably fragmented metropolitan area. And so there are over 100 incorporated municipalities in St. Louis County alone that have, over the course of the last century, poached the city of St. Louis of its fiscal capacity, of its wealthier citizens, of its very population.
Professor Gordon, we're trying to understand how we got here in the first place. And is it possible to actually point to specific policies, whether they're zoning policies or whatever, that enabled this kind of effective segregation to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really a chain of policies. It began, you know, St. Louis is one of a few cities that tried early in the 20th century to actually explicitly zone property use by racial occupancy. That was struck down by the Supreme Court, but what followed was a very meticulous set of practices by the real estate industry, reinforced by Missouri law, which placed covenants on deeds and confined the African-American population very closely to the north side of St. Louis. And these covenants were systematic across the city, and even more so in the suburbs as a way of sort of checking the growth of the African-American population.
Professor Gordon, I want to bring in the angle here of the militarization of the police. My morning must-read is from two members of the Friends Committee on National Legislation. They write in the New York Times that for a police department like Ferguson's, the path to becoming a paramilitary force is a short one. After loading up with free military gear, it is no surprise that law enforcement agents want to use it. There's been a lot of government funding post 9/11 to local police departments. How has that exacerbated the tension that already existed in Ferguson?
Well, I mean, you have what is in some respects a classic story of American cities, which is a confrontation between an African-American population and a white police force. And I think you put it very well when you militarize that, when you give these small communities that sort of capacity, the overreaction is predictable, entirely predictable.
Professor, I'm sure you're aware of Thomas Schelling's important work on segregation and race from the early 1970s, where the professor talks about a small movement in people ends up being a larger segregation. Isn't that what's going on in any community in America today?
Yeah, and I think, for much of the latter half of the 20th century, it was a pattern of segregation by race, and that's been displaced somewhat by a segregation by income, which is growing starker and starker in cities like St. Louis.
So critically, you would suggest in your research, Professor, that the segregation of 2014 is decidedly different from 1963-64?
No, I would not say decidedly different. I would say it's reinforced more by economic means now than by explicitly racial ones, but the underlying pattern is substantially the same.